date July 9th, 1969, is one of those days that, we choose to sometimes forget. Certainly it's the day that Tom Seaver chooses to forget. He carried a no-hitter perfect game into the top of the ninth inning. He got Randy Hundley on a comebacker to the mound, and then this little-known rookie reconverted shortstop who was only playing because the late Leo DeRocher was benching the Cubs' regular center fielder, Don Young, also, ironically enough, part of this group of men who were impacted by this situation. He was only playing because Don Young was being benched because he was in a slump. He lined a clean single to left center field between Cleon Jones and late Tommy Agee, and a perfect game was over. And I figured, Tom Seaver's done quite well for himself. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, very successful entrepreneur, has, I think, 120 acres of prime Napa Valley country in Calistoga, California. And Jimmy Qualls, when I hooked up with Jimmy, he was, like a lot of people in this country, having difficulty just paying the premiums on his health insurance. And in fact, at the All-Star game this past July 12th, Jimmy Qualls came home to tell his longtime companion that he had just been pink-slipped from the veterinary supply services company where he was working. So imagine that, the man's 65, he doesn't have a pension, doesn't have health insurance, and he has to start pounding the pavement looking for a job. But the genesis of the book really took off from there. I was fascinated by the fact that, we were having these perfectly pleasant conversations about that night in July 1969, and he just casually, very innocently, like we're talking now, mentioned that he wasn't getting a pension, a retirement annuity. And in the interest of full disclosure, I happen to work during the day for a public retirement system here in New York. And I know a little bit, therefore, about vesting and what it takes to be eligible for a pension. And I looked over his career numbers and I said, well, Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, but, gee, you didn't have more than, if you had 1 year under your belt, it was a lot. And for the benefit of you and your listeners, the Players Pension Fund was established on April 1st, 1947. You had to be on an active major league roster at that time, and you needed 5 years, and then we fast forward 22 years, and that threshold was lowered to 4 years. So all the men who I'm writing about, including George, they played from 47 to 79, and they needed 4 years. Well, if you recall, in 1980, there was a threatened strike, and it was very curious. They canceled the Players Union. They went out during spring training. The last 92 exhibition games went by the wayside. Then they came back. Then they came back and played for the first 7 weeks of the season. And they set Memorial Day weekend as their day when they were all going to walk out in unison. Fortunately, Ray Grebe, who was the negotiator for the league at the time, he turned to Marvin Miller, like you said, the first director of the Players Union. Don Fear was only the associate general counsel at that time, and he offered, Mr. Miller. And by the way, the book came out on Marvin Miller's 93rd birthday, ironically enough. It also came out on the day the Titanic went down, so I don't know what what that says about anything. And Ray Grebe offered Marvin Miller this really sweetheart proposal. One game is all you need to play, or at least be on an active major league roster for one game, and you'll have the right to purchase health insurance when you're a retiree, and then 43 game days to qualify for an annuity. Now, that's a really important point. Steve, you and I, we could suit up in mid-August. We could, by the way, we don't even have to play the field. We could just sit on the bench at Citi Field next to George, and, we would, if we made it through October, we would qualify for a pension because we're talking about 6 weeks, and that's about 43 game days. If we were a pitcher, like Steven Strasburg in 43 game days would probably make 5 starts, but he'd be credited with 43 game days. And Jimmy Qualls did not have that. And I basically said to him, well, there's no way you satisfied that requirement. What makes you think you're entitled to one? And he told me, and then subsequently I did some research, that there were two precedents in his favor. Remember how I said the Players' Pension Fund was established on April 1st, 47? Well, all those men who played prior to 1947, they cried foul. People like, you and your listeners might remember, the 1941 National League Most Valuable Player, Dolph Camille, or Pete Koskarot of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Well, they said, well, what are you telling us, that our service contributions and credit aren't as important as someone who played after 1947? And then in October of 97, these men were given, I won't call them pensions, but they were given life annuities, basically quarterly $2,500 payments, so they'd get $10,000 a year for their contributions to the game. They didn't include spousal or designated payments to their loved ones. They didn't include medical benefits, but they were compensated. And then in January of 97, I'm sorry, sometimes the history of this issue gets the best of me. In January of 97, maybe because to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, Major League Baseball unilaterally decided to award the veterans of the Negro Leagues, charitable contributions for their time. You needed a combination of 4 years, either in Major League Baseball or in the Negro Leagues, totaling 4, to be eligible for payments of $7,500 to $10,000 a year. That was in January 1997. In 2004, 89 more veterans of the Negro Leagues were given payments, or at least the option of choosing $350 a month for life or $40,000 for 4 years. But here's the thing, and I don't want to make this a racial issue, because God knows the color of my skin, the color of George's skin, we wouldn't have been precluded from playing Major League Baseball because of the segregation that was going on in the 20s and 30s and 40s. But let's say, Steve, I'm working for you, and whatever you deem fit is a pension requirement. Let's say it's 10 years in your company A, and I get fired after 8, or I quit after 7. All things being equal, I'd understand that a pension wasn't mine to have to begin with. Well, then Stork comes around, and you give George Theodore a pension. Now, why? He didn't do anything to work for you in your company A. That's sort of the frustration that a lot of the men who I'm writing about are feeling. We're very happy that the veterans of the Negro Leagues were being awarded for their time, but strictly speaking, a man like George has an employment contractual history with the league. A veteran of the Negro League did not.
Well, George, this goes to the point from the beginning of what we were talking about. Where there's no legal standard for baseball or the union to grandfather you guys into this. However, sometimes we worry too much in this country about legal things, who we're going to sue and who to take to court, that we forget about that there's a moral standard also. And, like Doug is saying, Major League Baseball went back and righted a wrong for the Negro League players who were slighted without the opportunity to be employed by Major League Baseball. They were not allowed to play until 47, until Jackie Robinson. So to right that wrong, they went back and included them into this pension program. So why couldn't they use that same moral standard to guys like you and the players of your era from that 47 to 79 that that if they were included under this 1980 decision would have qualified for pension and for medical benefits?
Well, that's precisely the situation. And as the collective bargaining agreement is coming up, we've been assured by the Alumni Association that they're working toward redoing this wrong. Doug